Hey guys, it's Mrs. Yeagle, and I'm here to read to you the 13th chapter of Addison Cooke and the Tomb of the Khan. Be sure you're following along, and as you listen, make sure that you're imagining this story in your head because the vivid verbs and the sensory details are just amazing. This chapter starts on page 129. It's called The Triad Guards. Addison's team low-lined across the alleyway and ducked behind a row of hay bales. Molly sneezed once, then twice, then 2 more times to keep the first 2 sneezes company. When she finally finished her sneezing fit, they peered over the wiry clumps of hay to survey the church. Generations of pigeons roosted in the tower belfry, the wrought iron bells long since melted down for cannons. Great doors of rotted oak hung ajar in the porticos of Gothic arches. Sections of slate roof were crushed inward by the heavy hands of time. Sun Tzu says you must begin every battle by gathering information, said Addison. Know thyself, know thy enemy. 1,000 battles, 1,000 victories. He turned to Raj. How many triads do you count? Raj counted the triads covering every door, watching the square, and patrolling the high parapets across the buttressed roof. 7. But if there are as many guards on the other side of the church, that makes 14. They must be really worried about us finding them, said Eddie. They're not losing sleep over us. They're worried about the Russians, Addison grimaced. The guards had every square inch of the church covered. He was having trouble finding a silver lining to this thundercloud. He plumbed the depths of his mind, but no ideas bubbled to the surface. He tried taking a few deep meditative breaths, but that only resulted in him, too, sneezing from the hay. That made Molly sneeze twice for good measure. At last he shook his head. There was only one solution. I need an Arnold Palmer. The team slunk across the far end of the square to the outdoor patio of a mahogany wood tea house. A group of Mongols sipping tin mugs of horse milk in the shadows grew silent and watchful as the New Yorkers entered. A Tajik man with a wizened beard and a goatskin vest greeted Addison in broken English. Good afternoon, said Addison, sinking into a cushioned seat. Arnold Palmer, please. The Tajik man blinked and looked around the establishment. He is not here. Addison saw that the man's English was not much better than Addison's Chinese. I'm not asking for Arnold Palmer, the famous golfer. I just want his drink. You wish to have Arnold Palmer's drink? Precisely. My friend, neither Arnold Palmer nor his drink have ever set foot in this restaurant. I don't need Arnold Palmer, the person, said Addison patiently. I just need Arnold Palmer, the drink. If this Arnold Palmer is not here, how can he have left his drink? The waiter was losing his patience. Addison saw they were rapidly reaching an impasse. Please, fill a glass with tea and lemonade. Put some ice in it, and we can forget all about Mr. Arnold Palmer. The waiter nodded. Do you have orange chicken? Eddie asked. Our chickens are regular colored. Do you have General Tso's chicken? I do not know General Tso, and I do not have his chicken. Is General Tso a friend of Mr. Palmer? Okay, fine, said Eddie. How about Mushu pork? No pork, Eddie, said Molly. We're in a Muslim city. Why don't they have Chinese food in China? Cried Eddie. Is that too much to ask? Once the team finally ordered, their food arrived quickly. They shared a cauldron of mutton stew so spicy Addison broke out in a sweat. He could not decide if the stew was delicious or if he was just ravenous with hunger. The team had barely eaten in a day. Addison discovered his Arnold Palmer was a strange concoction of tea and pomegranate juice, inexplicably doused with a mound of curry powder. He rather liked it. He was enjoying a few thoughtful sips when Molly spotted movement on the parapet of the church across the street. Aunt Delia and Uncle Nigel! Addison squinted his eyes and, sure enough, spotted the A&U being prodded along the tower roof by Madame Feng and Tony Chin. They appeared to be searching the outer wall of the belfry. If the aunt and uncle have led Madame Feng onto the roof, you can be sure the clue is down in the deepest basement, said Addison. They'll be doing everything in their power to slow her down. He drummed his fingers on the table. We've got to get inside. Somewhere in that eyesore of a church is the next clue to the Khan's treasure. Any ideas? Asked Eddie, fanning his mouth from the steaming heat of a second helping of stew. Addison concentrated. He'd taken this lunch break to observe the guards. He was hoping they'd rotate shifts, leave for coffee breaks, take naps, or perhaps grow old and retire. But it appeared these triads were professionals, and they weren't lowering their guard any time soon. The one advantage Addison could find was that he did not recognize any of the door guards' faces. If they were recruited locally, they would not recognize him either. He downed the remainder of his Arnold Palmer, or whatever it was, and shivered from the dregs of curry powder at the bottom of the pewter cup. He rolled up his sleeves. "Do you have a plan?" asked Molly, hurrying to keep up as Addison strode toward the church. "Sun Tzu says the supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting." That's great, Addison, but I think it might be a little bit better if we had a plan." I don't think they speak English, Addison," Eddie put in. "I'm counting on that." "Well, it's just that I think I'm with Molly on this one," said Eddie. "We need a plan." "Here's a plan." Addison gestured to a row of mules parked at the hitching post by the church's front entrance. "Hide behind that fig cart and wait for my signal to walk inside the church." "Well, what's your signal?" "The signal is when I tell you, Molly, and Raj to walk inside the church." Addison selected an apple and 2 eggs from a pushcart vendor and slipped the merchant a few yuan. He unfolded a large insert map of Kashgar from Fiddleton's Asia Atlas. Then, to his team's horror, he strode right up to the armed triad guards, who quickly moved to block the church door. The triads barked in Chinese. Addison didn't know what they were saying, but it did not sound friendly. They pointed for him to leave. "Hello," he said genially. "Does anyone speak English?" The guards looked at each other. "No English." Addison pointed to his map and spoke very slowly. "I'm creating a diversion so my friends can sneak into this church. Can you help me?" The guards grunted more orders in Chinese. The shortest triad, who seemed to know a few words in English, stepped forward. "You go now." "Here," said Addison. "Take this apple and hold it over your head, like so." Addison demonstrated and pressed the apple into the short triad's hand. The triad took it, baffled. Addison pointed to the map, then pointed to the apple. He motioned for the triad to hold the apple directly over his own head. The triad, thoroughly confused, did so. "Now you," said Addison, turning to a tall, skinny triad, "hold these 2 eggs directly over your eyes." Addison demonstrated before handing the eggs over to the triad. The triad covered his eyes with the eggs. Addison showed his map to the 3rd triad, round and muscled. "This is your church on the map." Addison pointed at it insistently. "My friends are going to sneak in while you stare at my finger." The short triad had no idea why he needed to hold an apple over his head. He slowly lowered the apple. "No," said Addison firmly, gesturing with his hand. "Keep that apple high." The short triad snapped the apple back into position over his head. The tall triad kept the eggs planted in front of his eyes. The round, muscled triad stared closer at Addison's map in confusion. The language barrier was too high for him to scramble over. Across the square, more guards took interest. They moved in, surrounding Addison. A large triad with a rifle slung over his shoulder gestured to Addison. "No English! You go now!" "Do you know the Chinese word for diversion?" Addison repeated to himself slowly and carefully. "Diversion." The large triad looked to the dozen soldiers now flanking him. He struggled to pronounce the English word. "Diversion." "Yes, diversion. You know, like when a magician gets you to look in the wrong direction while they perform a trick." "No English," said the guard again. Addison led the triads a few steps away from the shadow of the church door and tilted his map to the sunlight. He pointed adamantly at the map. "Molly, Eddie, and Raj," he said in the same tone he'd been using. "Walk inside the church now." The guards stared at him in confusion. The skinny guard dared to peek from behind the eggs he was holding in front of his eyes. Addison risked a quick glance over the large triad's shoulder to where Molly stepped uncertainly from behind the fig cart, tiptoeing toward the church. Raj ninja rolled past her and scuttled up the church steps on all fours like a beetle. Eddie stepped out into the open and stood there blinking. Molly and Raj beckoned him toward the church door, but Eddie seemed to have lost his nerve. The large triad seemed to sense movement behind him and turned to look. Addison hiked his map up in front of the triad's eyes. I just need you to stare at this map a few seconds longer because my friend Eddie is very slow. Molly grabbed Eddie and hauled him bodily up the church steps. Addison sighed as they safely skirted past the heavy oak door. He turned to the large triad. So you have no idea what a diversion is? The guard shook his head. Clearly not, said Addison, folding up his map. He patted the guard reassuringly on the shoulder and took the liberty of straightening the lapels on the man's jacket. I thank you, gentlemen. Here is my card if you ever need anything. He handed the large triad his business card with a flourish. The guards pressed close to study the card with confusion. They did not read any more English than they spoke. Have a pleasant afternoon. The guards watched him leave. The short triad slowly lowered the apple from over his head, staring after Addison in befuddlement. The skinny triad obediently kept the 2 eggs covering his eyes until the large triad smacked him on the back of the head. Addison strolled around the far side of the church, admiring the Nestorian architecture and tipping his cap to an incense vendor. When he reached the narrow alley behind the ancient building, he heard a whisper just over his head. Psst! Up here! Raj and Eddie reached their hands from the empty shell of a shattered stained glass window. Addison gripped their wrists, and they pulled him inside. That's the end of chapter 3. I hope you really liked that part about the diversion. The joke there, of course, is that the guards can't speak English, and so it doesn't matter what Addison says to them. They don't understand it. And the apple and the egg are just kind of goofy things he has to distract them. So tune back in for chapter 14, and I'll see you later. Bye, guys.